Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into a really powerful idea, one that says our organizations aren't just part of history, they're the ones writing it. So let's kick things off with a question that I think we've all felt. Have you ever looked around and thought, why does so much seem to happen every single day, yet so little actually seems to change? We're hit with this constant fire hose of news, crises, breakthroughs. It feels like the world is moving at a million miles an hour. But then you look at the big stuff, the economy, our culture, and it feels like it's stuck in concrete. Right? So that feeling, it's not just in your head. It's a real puzzle that thinkers have been wrestling with for a long time. And for decades, the standard answer was kind of simple. History was seen as this one-way street. The old way of looking at it was called downward causation. Basically, the idea was that big, massive historical forces, things like huge political shifts or major economic changes, they start way up high and then just kind of trickle down, shaping our companies and institutions along the way. In this view, organizations are just passive. They just take what history throws at them. But what if that's completely backwards? What if we've been looking at time all wrong? Well, a group of really groundbreaking French historians back in the 20th century, known as the Annales School, they came along and gave us a totally new way to think about all this. One of the key figures here, the historian Fernand Braudel, had this amazing way of putting it. He said that most of what we call history, the daily headlines, the political squabbles, it's nothing more than crests of foam, just surface-level noise riding on the back of these huge, powerful tides of history. It's the deep currents underneath that really matter. So to get our heads around this, Braudel said we need to see history as moving at 3 different speeds all at once. First, you've got the fast stuff. Events. That's the foam, the daily news, the crises. Then there's the medium speed stuff, conjuncture. Think of these as the tides, like big socioeconomic trends, things that play out over decades, like the Industrial Revolution. And then, at the bottom, you have the structure, or what he called the longue durée. This is the deep, slow-moving bedrock of history. Things like geography, climate, and those really, really deeply held beliefs that barely seem to change at all.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. In this model, those super fast events, especially the big explosive crises, they aren't just noise. They play a super important role.
You see, the Annals historians didn't see a crisis as just a wrecking ball. They saw it as a powerful microscope. It's this moment of incredible clarity, where all the hidden wiring of a system, all the contradictions and invisible rules we just accept without thinking, suddenly becomes totally visible. They had a name for this, a critical event. The 2008 financial meltdown is a perfect example, right? It wasn't just about banks failing. No, it ripped the lid off the whole system and forced everyone to ask, wait, what are the fundamental rules we've been playing by? It made us question everything. So what exactly do these crises put under the microscope? Well, they expose what the Annales School called mentalities. Think of these as the invisible software running in the background of a society. They're the shared, often unconscious beliefs and thought patterns that make up that deep, slow-moving bedrock of history. It's the stuff that dictates what people in a certain era even think is possible. Here's a great example. Another Annales historian, Marc Bloch, studied the medieval belief that a king could heal disease just by touching someone. Now, he wasn't interested in whether it was true. That's the wrong question. He asked something much more brilliant. Why did everybody believe it was true? The fact that this belief was so widespread and unquestioned, that's what reveals a mentality, a whole way of seeing the world that is just fundamentally different from ours today. Okay, so we have these different speeds of time, we have critical events, and we have these deep mentalities. So how does it all connect? Well, this is where we get to another one of Braudel's amazing metaphors, one that pulls it all together into a living, breathing model of change. Instead of that one-way street we talked about earlier, Braudel imagined the whole thing like an hourglass. But not just any hourglass, one that is, in his words, eternally reversible. Think about it. Most of the time, the sand, representing those slow, deep structures and mentalities, is flowing down, right? It's shaping the day-to-day events. But then, bam, a critical event happens. And that event is like someone flipping the hourglass over. All of a sudden, the sand, which is now the accumulated choices and actions from those recent events, starts flowing the other way. It flows upward and starts to reshape the very structure it came from. It's a two-way street. And we can actually map this out as a full repeating cycle. It kicks off with a critical event, that big shock. That shock forces everyone to start questioning the basic rules of the game. This leads organizations to make some really important choices about how to respond. And here's the kicker. When enough organizations make those choices, they add up. They create widespread institutional change, which then sets a completely new historical context. And in this whole process, it's the organizations that are the real engine of change. They're the ones turning today's actions into tomorrow's reality. And when organizations are put on the spot like this, they have a few different ways they can react. They can try decoupling, which is kind of like putting on a new coat of paint, adopting new practices for show but not really changing underneath. Or they can try to create hybrids, mixing old and new ideas. And sometimes they go for the nuclear option, a complete switching of logics, where they totally overhaul their entire system of beliefs and how they operate. And all of this leads to what is, for me, the most powerful and honestly empowering idea in this whole model. It completely flips our usual understanding of how change happens. Remember that downward causation we started with? The idea that history just happens to us? Well, this model throws that out the window. It introduces upward causation, the idea that the accumulation of choices made inside our organizations actually flows up to create history itself. We're not just passengers on the ride, we're actually helping to build the track. So here's the bottom line. Our organizations, our companies, our nonprofits, our governments, they aren't just reacting to things. They are the essential connection. They're the drive belt, the mechanism that takes the energy from short-term, fast-moving events and uses it to turn the gears of long-term structural change. Which, of course, leaves us with a pretty heavy question to think about, doesn't it? If the choices our organizations are making right now are literally writing the history of tomorrow, what kind of story are we all telling? Because the sand for the future, for that next flip of the hourglass, is being gathered as we speak.